So very unoriginally named, Matt and Fiona is not just Matt and I. We're supported by a lovely team, and we work with many different organisations and people, and of course young people and children. And we are driven by twofold, really, by the stark way that increasingly in many areas the built environment, young people are more and more disenfranchised from the built environment. The figures on the screen show the number of youth work jobs that are being cut and the number of youth centres that are being closed. And so in a very physical sense, we know that there are fewer public realm spaces for where children and young people are being welcomed. And we think that that's fundamentally a real challenge, because beyond their homes and beyond school, where are the places for young people to form their identities and work out the human beings that they want to be of the future? We also think that, and everyone else has touched on this much more articulately than me this morning, that young people have a huge amount to offer to creating a more inclusive, a more representative, a more environmentally friendly and aware built environment. And so by excluding them, not only is that to the detriment of the next generation and to children and young people, but it's also hugely to the detriment of everyone in society. And then alongside this, I'm sure everybody in this space is very aware of how, despite teachers' best efforts and pushing against the grain, creativity has really been undervalued in school curriculums. And this means that for many young people, particularly young people at state schools, in areas where there's a lack of funding, sometimes these are the subjects that are first to go, and we're seeing that in a direct decline in the number of young people who are pursuing design and technology and art and design. And again, we feel that creativity, now more than ever, is one of the key skills that we as a society and future employers are looking for, and yet we're simply not giving young people the opportunity to pursue that. So we have this twofold: we want a better education and we want a better built environment, and that's what drives the work that we do. We're really proud of our reach, that hopefully is showing on the screen here, but we're also crucially aware that I think there's something like 10 million young people in the UK right now, across the UK. So if we look at these figures in comparison to that, there is so much more work for all of us to be doing, and again that really kind of drives us forward. As mentioned, we are supported by a really wonderful, talented team of people who come from a variety of backgrounds, some from architecture and the built environment, some from education, some from even things like publishing. And as Victoria's already mentioned, I think we're all super aware of the challenge of funding, and the ability to write a good funding application is not something to take lightly. This photo needs updating. It's worth mentioning Rosie in the purple scarf there. I know she's been very involved in supporting today's symposium, and she very much, and all the members of the team, continue to inspire us. So where did we start from? We hope that we have professionalised and matured over the last 7 years since we set up, but actually we set up as two friends in 2016 who had a shared passion for wanting young people to be able to have a genuine voice. And I think we've both seen fantastic examples where young people were invited to the design table, maybe to make a model or do a drawing, but too often their ideas would then end up in a filing cabinet, never to be seen again, never to see the light of day. And yet they were full of everything that Joe's been talking about, that Neil and Russ have been talking about, full of inclusion, environmental awareness. And we were thinking, well, this is such a shame that these ideas are not being taken forward into reality. So we crowdfunded our first project with the intention that young people should be able to set the brief for a space for themselves, design it, and then physically be involved in the construction of it. And we were very fortunate that Sutton House, a Hackney National Trust property, lent us not only space to give over to young people for the summer of 2016, but also on a practical level lent us their insurance and their good faith. And so although they couldn't give us any money, we crowdfunded to make this very first kind of project happen over the course of a week. We were really surprised with the, I think we just thought it would be a one-off project. And I think Wilson's in the room here. Wilson will remember he was one of the very kind volunteers, in his own right, a very talented educator and designer who supported us on that project. We were actually quite overwhelmed by the response, initially, mainly from the cultural sector, to how can we do this? We really see value in supporting young people who don't normally have a voice and are underrepresented in their communities and in their built environment and the creation of it. How can we do these types of programs? And that led us to kind of formalizing what we call the build process. And since then, we've continued to try to reflect on where does the value lie in what we're doing, what's working, what's not working, what could be better. And over the last kind of 6 years has now developed into an ongoing strategy called Build, Learn and Connect, which we will whisk through now.
So the build element of our work, which Fi's just introduced, is one where young people are fully engaged in that process. And as Fi said, historically, often working with cultural collaborators, but is a very hands-on process and happens at a range of scales, from desktop to hall size to actual buildings. And then even more impressively, plugging those ideas very directly into built architecture by others. And as Fi said, whilst those projects in the first few years, but probably up until sort of 2019, 2020 and COVID, were principally supported by cultural collaborators who had really close engagement. Some of them you can see on the screen here, close engagement with their communities and a real understanding of that need, but wanted to amplify the opportunity for those relationships. And one project in particular, Hull City of Culture, I guess, enabled us to think about really the value of these type of projects, where they have real long-term true ownership by the young people and are sited within the heart of emerging and developing communities. So this project called Made in Oakfield was part of Hull City of Culture and was an opportunity for the learning team there, for a vision to every young person to have a direct experience in that program of the City of Culture. In our case, we got to work with an amazing group of young people from a pupil referral unit who were in residential care. And our brief was to work with them to design a new shed on their allotment. And our processes always engage physical sort of model making and sort of tool-based work, which is very allows everyone to contribute to that. And in this case, they had ambitions of a new shed, which was much more beyond the brief, but worked within the constraints of the brief to make, I guess, a place of belonging, not only for them, and we've heard this repeatedly today, which is really reassuring always, of this way in which young people think of beyond their own world. In this case, we're thinking of this space that they created on the allotment actually as something, as you can see, an emerging community here, housing growing around this allotment, but they were thinking about that space not only as a respite from their own residential kind of space and care, but also for the allotment holders in the community. And that building became something which they created a real sense of ownership of, but not only for themselves, but for other people. And it became it's become a real sort of a catalytic project for us, thinking about how this is really important, particularly with our work with our wider partners in the construction and placemaking sort of sectors.
So coming out of Build, we recognised through evaluation, through feedback, through conversations, and having the privilege to keep in touch with many of the young people we'd worked with through their teachers and carers, of how life transforming this process can be. But these projects can be quite intensive and reach a relatively small number. So in thinking about how can we take the ethos and the essence of these projects, how can we reach a much larger number? And that's where Learn comes in. And again, I know in the Symposium there are some wonderful collaborators we've worked with, such as Sandra at the Built Environment Trust, thinking about how can we take these kind of principles but share them with a much wider audience. So we typically do that through elements of work such as training the trainer, teacher training, thinking about how do we create the next steps. This speaks very much to the work that Neil's doing at the LSA as well. How do we create that ladder of learning so that a young person who is inspired through one of these projects can actually find their way into the built environment professions, and that they don't find barriers in terms of not having the right GCSE grades or not living in the right part of the UK to access the college that they need to go to. And that's coming through in research and partnerships, thinking about how we can progress apprenticeships and certification for this kind of work. So just to share a few of these projects, and I think Natalie is on this call as well, Natalie Wells at the GLA, who at the Mayor of London's office, who runs the fantastic Design Future London competition, which is open to all young Londoners, not just those at school, but also those in the world of work and those in training, to think about the future of part of London. And we've had the privilege to work with Natalie over the last few years to support on creating the resources that enable teachers to take that project forward. And that's been incredible, because we know that I believe that project is now reaching kind of upwards of sort of 25,000 young people each year, which is brilliant, giving them the chance to kind of have their say and to understand kind of careers within the built environment. And I know this year the Mayor of London's office and Natalie are working in collaboration with Sandra and the Built Environment Trust and ourselves to develop some programming for this December. But if there are any teachers on this call, it's something that's live now that you can start taking part in. We also increasingly are working and collaborating with higher education institutes and universities with widening participation programs. We always, I think, what's true to any type of project we do is that we think it needs to be hands-on and involve making as well as kind of problem solving. So even if a project doesn't progress as far as a build, there will be lots of model making and encouraging the development of those skills in kind of dexterity, but also the well-being that can come about from seeing something that you've made and you've crafted kind of with your own hands from your imagination.
So if Learn is about, I guess, the sort of depth and reach of how we can work with wider audiences of young people, Connect is about bringing young people's voice to the table with the placemakers and the place shapers in our communities. So working with local authorities and developers and I guess people that have the ability to transform and change our cities and towns. And we'll come and touch on some of that work, particularly which Russ has elaborated on. And Russ, it's really lovely to hear your reflections on that. And it's been really heartening to have such a sort of powerful champion for that work. But I think it's for us, it's that is about bringing that voice to the table, and so it's loud and clear. And that's about really establishing kind of a meaningful process of consultation and engagement. And Russ has again shown sort of the sort of testament to that today, but also timely, I think, bringing those in, young people's voices in at the right time, thinking about co-design as a process which is really genuine and brings those voices as genuine collaborators, genuine co-designers, rather than maybe just influencers. And then as I'm hoping we're doing in many projects now, embedding those young people's voices at the heart of their design teams. And we have a range of projects that are starting to show that. One which was for Grosvenor a couple of years ago, which we were working with them and Tonkin Loo, thinking about a large public square in London, and working with the amazing 2 to 3 Degrees, who had established a youth forum and had worked with them over a number of months. And we came in to support with the meanwhile element of that project. And again, here you can see the outcome of a number of workshop sessions, which culminated in these outdoor pieces of furniture, which were their reimaginations, well, not reimaginations, their imaginations of different ways of engaging in public space, the reinvention of the bench to both places of meeting, but also gathering, socializing. And we're often finding now that the importance and the value of Meanwhile as not only as really worthwhile use of space in between a project or an emergence of a project, but also as prototype, as ways of those young people's voices, as we've heard from many people this morning, are often very forward thinking, but also pragmatic, and they are an opportunity in the real world to test those ideas, and for people beyond just themselves to familiarize themselves with what that possibility might be, and not close down those conversations. This is a lovely project with Waltham Forest, and I think it's really important that to see the increasing, I mean, for us at least, increasingly supportive, well, with Fiona's touched on people like Natalie, but in this case, Waltham Forest, understanding that our emerging planning policy, the sections or parts of that planning policy and local plans that are related to young people, written in this case by adults, but then testing and validating or exploring whether that's valid by young people interrogating those. And so this was these are slides from a workshop where young people are looking and critiquing, I guess, always through making and through live kind of exercises, the emerging policy in this case, which was about teen play spaces and safer spaces for youth in the borough. And then this project, which is for Bywater, a smaller scale developer, but building a new building that was public facing. So not a public building, but a developer acknowledging, I guess, their civic responsibility. You can see the top right slide here, designed by Field and Clegg Bradley, beautiful ceramic facade that has been designed by a group of local school children who, and understanding from a developer the importance, albeit not a public building, it's public facing, would have an impact on that existing park, and bringing those voices to the table through a series of workshops that, in this case, looked at the history of that area, and particularly a strong history of decorative arts and design. And we can see here
a few of these slides. Go on social media. Sorry, pardon.
Sorry.
Sorry.
This is our final.
Sorry,
we're coming to the end. In case
I don't know if we're going too long, but yeah. So ending on our project with Latimer and Tender and Coulter Borders Garden Community and the Youth Forum, which Russ has touched on earlier on. I mean, I think it's, for us, this has been an absolutely incredible project here. And you see this at the big slide to the right was the very first session. None of these people had met each other, but with a genuine coming to the table with a genuine openness. And this was, I think, in the naming or exploring what they might call themselves. And our first 6 months working with them, again, testament to Latimer's support of this process, has been about skilling them and supporting them to be able to articulate themselves, and also listening to their lived experience. And that now has pivoted to and as Russ said, these young people were brought on board before the design team, so they were able to get sort of fully up to speed with the ambition of the project from Latimer's perspective. And then while the design team was starting to get themselves together, we were able to meet just before the summer, and the project pivots now with a really lovely sort of circular dialogue where design team members are coming in for each strand of their work. They're talking about respective parts of their scheme. Young people, we just finished a workshop this Wednesday, which was absolutely incredible, thinking about movement and transport, and again, really incredible ideas that the design team are being able to take on board and absorb. And this idea of a sort of a direct feedback loop and finding that time for that. So we're super proud of that, what we've achieved so far with this project. We think it's testament to a process that should be, really applied to as many projects as possible. And really looking forward to seeing where that goes as we move forward.
Just final slide is that ultimately these kind of projects are all about people and people's lived experience, and how we can enhance that for the better. And I think, as Joe said before us, young people have so much to offer on every level. It can only make projects richer for everyone, not just for young people, by involving them. So thank you.